Well, welcome to Qdabra's weekly webinar. This is Patrick Halstead, and today we have a new topic for you again. And we're talking about InfoPath ribbons today and how to replace them in Qdabra forms. And I want to give a quick shout out to Andy Swarren, who gave us this great idea a week or so ago. Andy, thank you very much. It's also great to see you here in the webinar today. So before we get started, I just have a quick poll for you today. And we're just going to jump to the chase and just ask you this question. What is the number one benefit of adding a ribbon? There's just two answers, one or the other, unless you've got something that I can't think of, which would be other. So there's three answers, actually. The first answer is UI consistency with InfoPath filler or InfoPath list forms. In other words, we'll show how InfoPath list forms use a ribbon here in a minute. The other possible reason would be consistency across all of your forms. And we actually have another solution that does buttons in the task pane, which is called Central Flow, which we'll talk a little bit about today too. Okay, so it looks like most of you are choosing that second option here. Thanks for playing the poll with me here. And we have Edgardo Cruz with me today too. He's one of our new members at Qdabra. So Edgardo goes by the nickname Pom, P-O-M. Pom, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here. So we're going to replace the ribbon. We're going to add the ribbon actually to our Qdabra forms. So by default, FormsViewer does not support the InfoPath ribbon. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that, well, it's not always a great design element because it's stuck at the top of your form. It prevents you from doing like responsive design. You know, if you wanted to create a form that was more responsive, you'd have to take that ribbon into account. It kind of puts something there that, you know, makes the forms all look the same way, which is good in some ways, but it also has a save button. And the save button, if you're not careful, will allow the user to create a form with a random name. In other words, they can just choose whatever name they want. So for those reasons, and for the reason that print was kind of, well, who prints browser forms? But anyway, we're going to show you how print works in Qdabra Forms today too. We're going to do the whole thing. So there wasn't really a good reason why we didn't support it. We just didn't like it. And now we're providing a workaround for that, a manual workaround for this. And we may actually add this to FormsViewer in the future. In other words, automatically adding it to all forms. We probably won't do that because a lot of customers like to not have it there. So it is an option in InfoPath. You can actually turn it on, turn it off. I think it's on by default. And what does it look like? Well, let's just do the quick demo here. This is a list. So this is a stock SharePoint list, SharePoint 2000, SharePoint 365, SharePoint Online. And I'm just going to click on one of these items here. And you can see it's opening in FormsViewer, and it's giving me the item in a read-only view. And you can see there's a ribbon. Now, this does not look like your typical ribbon because usually you'll have the form all the way shifted to the left. So you can definitely tell this is FormsViewer. But you're getting the same look and feel as the ribbon in InfoPath. And I'm just going to make a quick change here so you can see that this is actually live. I'm going to do save. Save switches it back to the read-only view, and then of course we can print it, and that generates a PDF, which is unlike InfoPath. So that's another feature that we've added here. And where was I? It was right here. And I can of course go back into Edit, and I can make another change, and click Submit, and then it's going to close and take me back to the list. And then I can click on the form again just to see that it round trip everything. You can see it in the column there too, that it's round tripping the changes I'm making. So that's basically what we did. We added that ribbon to a form, and how did we do that? So we're going to talk about that today. Basically, there's a bunch of steps. I'm going to go over them in a second, but what you saw the functionality that is in this slide. We added the ribbon. We added some rules on load to automatically switch to a read-only view. We added an edit button to switch back to the edit view. Save, submit buttons, close buttons. So the save keeps you in the form, but it changes it back to read-only. Submit submits the form and closes it. Close, of course, closes the form. And then the print button prints the form using RenderForm. So that's what we did with the form. And of course, we're going to take a look at that here. So obviously, if you're in Forms here, you can just go to your Manage Templates. And here we have the one form for the webinar today. If I click on this and click on Design, you'll see the buttons there at the top that we add to the form. We've got two different views here. The edit, actually we've got three views. We've got a view for the print as well. So you can see there's where the section is with the ribbon. We've got a little logo at the top as well. The print view removes that because we don't want that to show up in the print view. We just want it to print. Okay, so that kind of totally makes sense. If we look at the form load, unload rules, you'll see that we have this, we don't have any rules on load. And the reason for that is that we're using Q rules in this form. So we've actually injected the form with Q rules, which is the best practice because we need to run a bunch of special commands on load that will identify if the form is actually opened read-only or not. And we can tell because if the form has already been saved to SharePoint lists, the default functionality should be to open it read-only. If it's a new form, let's go back to the list. If it's a new form, we could change this button here at the top to say new. Right now, just this form is here, but if it's a new form, it's going to automatically give us that edit view. If it's an existing form, we want it to automatically open up in the read-only view. Let's try Qdabra here. Okay, so it's pretty obvious there. So the form on load is doing that. It's first of all, it's loading these resources, and the resources are here to, well, let's just take a look at the resources. So this is loading an open URL command JavaScript file, apparently, because we're doing something with that command. We're getting the ID. So this is the key step. If the form has an ID, then we know it was already created. How do we know it has an ID? It's on the actual URL. So when you open the form, like we did with Qdabra a minute ago, I think I guess we lost that, but if I open it again, you'll see that on the URL here at the top, we have this thing at the very bottom of the URL, end of the URL, called FB list item. And that corresponds to number 5 here, which tells us that it's the 5th item in the list that we're opening. And if I go back to the list, you'll see the ID for that item at the top should be 5. There it is right there. So the ID tells us that it's an existing item, and therefore we should switch to the view, the read-only view. So that first of all, we're getting the input parameter there, we're setting it, and then if it is at some point here, right here at the end, if that condition is met, list item is not blank, then it's going to switch to that read-only view using the set default view command. So there's a couple commands you need to add to the form. If you look at the debug, so we actually created a little debug here at the bottom of the form just to show you everything that it's doing. And these are the rules that it's running. You can see them in the form designer as well, but you can see here we've got the load resource. We're actually loading 2 resources, CSS to make it look good. And then we're getting that input parameter, FB list item, and we're getting 2 input parameters. Actually, we're getting the URL as well because we're going to fix up the data connections in the next command to point to this specific site. This is the best practice, dynamic data connections we've talked about a lot. We actually have a new feature coming that will make it even easier in the near future. We're going to be allowed to set variables on the server so you don't have to do this stuff in your form so much. And then we click on use option. So use option queries a list. When you're querying a list and you have old users, obsolete users in the list forms will break. This is a SharePoint protocol issue. So we have this command here to make sure that even obsolete users, if we have them in the list, is not going to break when we open it. And we're just changing the way the list query works for that. That's kind of an esoteric command. You can ignore that. But then at the end there, you see what we're setting the default view. So we've got a bunch of QRLs commands that we're doing on loading the resource, getting the input parameter, dynamic data connection fix up, using that special option to query a list that has obsolete users so it doesn't break SharePoint, and setting the default view to the read-only view. So that's pretty much all there is to it. And once again, the reason for this is to give your users a seamless experience when you're migrating list forms. So they're used to seeing the ribbon for whatever reason, because you have the ribbon enabled. Give them that experience so they don't freak out, no surprises, right? The other reason would be just to keep things consistent, to have all your buttons in one place. But we also have another solution for that, which is called Central Flows Task Pane, which we have done in the past, and we've actually done webinars on it. And last June was one. June 2021 was the first time we did that. We're going to do another webinar next week on Central Flows. It might be another week after that. We're preparing for it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So here's a list in this slide showing exactly what we did. We injected the form with Q rules so we could add those on load rules. We added a read-only view. When you're adding a read-only view, you need to right-click the items and make them calculated values. So in Forms Designer, you can see that this is not the read-only view. This is the default view, which has editable fields in here. But if I switch to the read-only view, you'll see that these are all now calculated values. So when you do create that read-only view, you can copy everything in the view from one view to another. You can use InfoPath Designer to do that. You can use Forms Designer to do this, I believe. And then what you can do is you can actually, delete these items. If you're in InfoPath Designer, you can right-click them and you can actually switch them from one control to another. And that might be easier instead of using Forms Designer, which does not have that feature yet. You should use InfoPath Designer to copy the view. And then once you copy it, it's going to look like the main default view. So you're going to have to go through every single item, just right-click them and you can change to calculate value. And that's just a feature in InfoPath Designer that we have not added support for yet in Forms Designer. But stuff is coming. We've got a whole bunch of features coming at the end of this year. And then, of course, we're going to continue to add new things next year because we're committed to Forms Designer. So we've done that. So you're going to add that view, read-only view. You're going to make sure that you have a field in your main data source called isReadOnly that you can use. In our case, we're using the list item to switch to that view. So we're using a different variable in the form, FE list item. I think it's called list item ID in our sample. But you can call it whatever you want, but you need a field in your form that you set so that you can switch the view. And if it's not true, if it is true, it's true by default, and then you get set it to false, or if there's an ID in the URL. And then you'll have your conditional save and submit buttons. So you'll basically be displaying them on the view, and you'll have an edit button if it's the read-only view, which switches back to the main view. And there's a bunch of other things here too, changing the default view. Read-only, that we talked about that, adding a print button with the RenderForm. So let's take a look at the print button. So we have to go to the read-only view, click on the print button, and take a look at the rules here. And you can see this is just basically running a QRules command called RenderForm. And that's the command right there. It's RenderForm format PDF output. And then we're saying views equals print. So we're going to create a new tab with the PDF on it. So that's how easy it is to create a print button for your forms. And these buttons, they look like the InfoPath, InfoPath Form Services list forms, and we've just basically copied the image from there, and we've actually used the image on the button, so it looks very similar. Any questions for me?
Yes, I actually have one. The buttons on the ribbon, I would assume they're customizable.
Yeah.
And I can add.
Right.
So let's say
we're doing this bonus technique of copying the look and feel of the list forms so people aren't freaked out, no surprises. And we're using the buttons from the InfoPath form services. We're just copying the image actually. Now we're creating a button from them and adding them to the form. You can actually create your own buttons. You can just add a button here. You can add different images for it. So you can do that. You can use any buttons. You could add buttons here, like you could have a button to solve world hunger or something like that. You can just put that next to these. And the same is true for the main view. Good, great question. Thanks, Bob. Anyone else have a question for me? If you do, we've got this questions area in the GoToWebinar. You can just add your question there and we'll see it. I'm going to switch back to my slides for a second. So that technique of using the actual image from the InfoPath form services list forms was a bonus technique. So you could just add regular buttons and they wouldn't look like the list forms that you see. Now let's take a look at that for a second here. So if I go back to my list, and where's my list here? I guess I can just close it here. So you know it's running Forms Viewer when you click on an item and it opens in Forms Viewer. But let's actually revert the list to a non-Forms Viewer experience. How do we do that? Well, we go to the site contents, and there's a site page here that has Forms Viewer extensions added to it. So Forms Viewer extensions is the app that you use to configure your lists and library forms in modern settings. It's a pretty simple app. You just add it to a web page, site page, and then you can go in here and you can configure a list. Now we only have one list in this site, so I'm just going to turn everything off, and I'm just going to click Apply Changes. And what that's going to do is it's going to decouple the list from Forms Viewer. So if I go back to my list, you should now see no Forms Viewer button on top, and we have the stock InfoPath experience. And that experience is, let's just open line here, is like this. So you get this ribbon at the top, and you also have this navigation pane, which we do not add to our forms. But you have the same experience here as you saw with Forms Viewer. You can click on Edit. Now it gives you Save. There's no Submit here. We've added Submit, so we're a little bit different than the ribbon, but it looks very similar. If I go and remove this here and click Save, it's going to take me back to a read-only view of the form. Actually, no, it's going to close it. So there's some different behavior there. You can see that it also reverted to the previous setting for the links. I think that's just a caching problem. Yeah, if I refresh it, no, it's still there. That is weird. There have been some issues with this Forms Viewer extensions not sticking, and we've there's problems with obviously with SharePoint. So I'm not sure what happened there, but if I try this again, okay, so we've gotten rid of it now. Nope, it's still there. Is it opening though in Forms Viewer or not? Let's see, it's opening correctly. The links there are correct. It's just that the icon at the top of the ribbon in the list is still Forms Viewer. For some reason, it's stuck. Okay, well, anyway, this is opening in InfoPath. And if we want to change it back to open Forms Viewer, because we don't like InfoPath, this is going away soon, then we just come back here and we just select the list that we want. We select all of the links. Make sure that suppressed loading is on. If you've got commands that are automatically updating the data connections on load, you don't want to load the list item automatically. You want to have the rule do it. And then we'll click Apply again. And now we should be back to the previous experience that I demoed at the beginning, where all the links open in Forms Viewer. Now you could do, let me just show you one more thing here. We've done this in the webinar in the past, but you can see here we've got additional settings here. So we've got the ability to hide the new button, which we've done here. And we've also got the ability to change the name of the Forms Viewer button. I'm just going to call that new and click Apply. And this is a best practice because you don't want the users to be confused about where to go for new. So now this was Forms Viewer. Now if I click on Refresh, it should change it to new. So we've hidden the default new button. Still Forms Viewer. It's not updating. Well, I think I've got a caching issue. I think if I open this in, there it goes. Okay, we finally got it. Okay, so there's the new button that we just renamed. And then all of these links now should open in Forms Viewer. because we've updated the links. So that Forms Your Extensions app is critical for doing that. And yeah, any questions for me? Any other questions for us? I want to thank Palm for being here with me. We do have the only solution on the market that allows you to take your existing forms and migrate them easily off of InfoPath. But we also have a ton of new features we've added, including this render's PDF command that you saw today, along with the dynamic data connections, changing the connections on load. There's a gazillion features we've added over the years to FormZero to make it better for today's modern forms. CSS, JavaScript, you name it. Forms can look really beautiful. We're probably going to do some beautiful webinars here coming up. We've been doing a lot of kind of nuts and bolts over the summer, but coming this fall, we'll probably have some Mel's new beautiful forms to show you new techniques for UI. You're also not alone. Don't forget, if you do have Qdabra forms, you've got Qdabra at your back for any issues that come up. I think this 7.2 is out of date now. I think we're on like 7.4 or something. You can check by just going to FormZero and actually just looking at the bottom here. 7.3 is the update one, July 19th. We're going to be launching a new version of FormZero and Forms Designer here in the next month with environment variables, and we'll talk more about this in a webinar in September. We also have a webinar coming up on central flows to show you a technique using a task pane for consistently adding workflow buttons to your form. It is a replacement for SharePoint Designer. So if you're trying to move off of SharePoint Designer as well, now's a good time. We have a solution for you, and it's free as part of the Qdabra forms. We might charge for it in the future, but if you've got it now, it'll always be free for you. And you can get the FormZero app in the App Store, and obviously that includes Forms Designer. So I want to thank you all for joining. We're going to try to do it again next week. We might take a break, but we're shooting for Central Flows next week. So stay tuned to this channel. Hope you guys have a great day. Thank you very much.